Hi there, my name is Rob and I make videos primarily about health and nutrition. Today I want to talk to you about two phenomenons, which are regulatory capture and corporate censorship, and how these two phenomenons can possibly affect your health and your health outcomes and what you can do about it. In the first part of the video, I will talk about what regulatory capture and corporate censorship are, and in the second part of the video, I will explain what all this has to do with your health and how you can circumnavigate these two phenomenons in order to achieve better health outcomes. So first, what is regulatory capture? So regulatory capture happens whenever the government tries to regulate anything. So what happens is that any industry that the government is trying to regulate is complicated, and generally government bureaucrats have no clue about the specifics of those industries and businesses that they are trying to regulate. They need to find experts who are insiders in these industries and hire them because of their expertise on the subject. Otherwise, they cannot regulate them effectively. So basically, they hire insiders to those particular industries because those people have the expertise that is required to effectively regulate that particular industry. This unfortunately leads to a revolving door between the regulators and the industries they are trying to regulate. And this phenomenon of insiders to these industries ending up co-opting the regulatory agencies that were put in place to regulate them is known as regulatory capture. So what ends up happening is that these insiders end up making all kinds of regulations that just protect their particular businesses or industries, usually from competition, but also from the damaging effects of the regulations themselves. So they either make regulations to keep well-established players in these industries from competition from small startups and mom-and-pop businesses in those same industries, or they purposely don't enact regulations that can make it difficult to operate their business. Many large companies have whole compliance departments that are there just to make sure that they are complying with all the rules and regulations, and they are fully aware that small mom-and-pop businesses and startups cannot afford to do this, so they actually send lobbyists to lobby politicians to enact regulations that these larger stores can afford to follow, but they know that smaller players in their industry can't, so they can put these smaller players out of business. This is why, for example, many large box chains are in favor of increasing the minimum wage, because they know that small mom and pop stores can't afford to pay it, and this government mandated increase will put those stores out of business. All the while, they dupe the public into thinking they are the good guys and dupe activists and protesters into protesting for this cause. And those protesters think the big chains are looking out for them, for the little guy, when in fact they are actually doing them a disservice by increasing unemployment and making it harder for smaller businesses to get started up in the first place, and in addition raising the price of those products. This is actually an anti-competitive activity that they are engaging in, and they are using these protesters, activists, and politicians to do their dirty work. Another phenomenon you should be aware of is corporate censorship. Corporate censorship in the media comes in two forms. So one is partisan censorship, and the other is the standard type of corporate censorship. Political or partisan censorship just refers to the fact that our entire news media is only given from one angle, which is the same angle over and over again in virtually all forms of media, whether it's the mainstream news, TV shows, Hollywood movies, or what have you. So our entire mainstream media is largely dominated by one political opinion and is always given from that slant. And the media largely controls the opinions and viewpoints of the masses. Opinion polls from the general public show that public opinion on any given topic largely conforms to what is shown on the nightly news. So in other words, the media controls the minds of the masses. Most people are completely unaware of the counter-argument to these opinions that are given in our news media, as they are not widely talked about or known by the general public, and in most cases need to be seeked out in alternatives to mainstream media. And in addition, the opinions of the other side of the political spectrum are much more complicated, more nuanced, and contain more abstractions that need to be fleshed out in detail, and in many cases require in-depth knowledge of economics, history, and other subjects that the general public largely doesn't have, and so require more long-form discussion than you would get in the quick sound bites that you would get in the mainstream news. This is why one side of the political spectrum understands the other side's arguments completely and in detail, while the other side is completely oblivious to the counter-arguments to these. It's because these counter-arguments are not widely known by most people, as they have to be seeked out, as they are not on public display anywhere. The news media is given from this slant, and often the counter-arguments to these are mischaracterized, either intentionally or just simply misunderstood. And this mischaracterized and misunderstood version is what you normally would see on the news. I'm going to play you a short clip of what I mean. Here is the clip of the YouTuber Tim Pool explaining how CNN purposely edited a video of comedian, MMA fighter, and YouTuber Joe Rogan when he came out as having COVID.
Let's do this. Let's talk about how they control your mind. I got here a clip from Joe Rogan.
Oh, yeah.
Joe posted, so there's two videos playing side by side, top and bottom. On the top is CNN's version, broadcast version of Joe Rogan's announcement that he was being treated for COVID. On the bottom is Joe's actual video. For those that can't see, this is insane. CNN altered the colors to make Joe Rogan look grayish green.
Sick.
It's crazy. I'm gonna play a little bit. Okay, I guess you can't hear it. Oh, here we go.
Z-Pack, prednisone.
Well, you get the point. So look, it's hard to describe this for people who are listening other than they altered the colors of Joe Rogan's skin to make him look like he's dying.
Yeah, they make him look like a Frankenstein green potato.
Yes.
Like literally. Rotting green potato.
Joe just posted the clip and he put yellow journalism, fake news. Here's what you guys need to understand about this. Someone at CNN, and probably more than one person, probably someone with some authority, said, we are going to edit this footage, make Joe look very sick. They're not going to gain any extra views by making Joe look sick. No, people aren't going to be like, hey, everybody, watch this video of Joe Rogan. No. What they're doing is the people who watch CNN will just see a very sickly looking Joe Rogan. All they're really doing, it's not about ratings. This is CNN, in my opinion, deliberately trying to manipulate the narrative, to mind control, to brainwash, to propagandize.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the same time they were making the arguments that Joe Rogan was taking horse medicine and, of course, was dealing with COVID in a way which they clearly presented him not dealing with in a good way. Meanwhile, in the video, he's like, hey, I just got COVID a couple days ago. I'm feeling better than ever. I took this and this and this and this. I threw the kitchen sink at it. So their narrative was very important to upkeep. One of the ways that they kept this narrative is by faking this video, by lying to the American people to portray it as if he wasn't doing well, which is absolutely ridiculous.
You need to go to Joe Rogan's Instagram. If you can't see this because you're listening on the podcast, you need to see this because your jaw will hit the floor. They make him look like he's got like lupus or liver cancer.
Super like pale white light and dark shadow.
Yeah, this is why CNN is the enemy of humanity. I mean, this is it. And this was their reaction to it, along with other corporate media representatives that were mad that he got better. He was able to improve his health, and so was Dana White, so was Aaron Rodgers, and so were a lot of people, including congressmen and women, that take the same treatment as he does. The treatment that they're trying to, of course, say doesn't exist, doesn't work, and it's based on horses. That's ridiculous and criminal.
Regardless of that, if you go to your doctor and your doctor says they have a recommendation or prescription, why is CNN telling people not to do that?
Yeah, why?
It's
sponsored by Pfizer.
Exactly.
Is that why?
I've seen people.
So as you can see, this is how the mainstream media purposely deceives the public and pushes certain narratives and intentionally hides or distorts the truth. The other type of corporate censorship is the more standard variety of corporate censorship. Corporate censorship occurs when usually some large companies place advertisements on TV, and then they have a say in what type of content goes on the TV, meaning that they control the content that is displayed in the mainstream news because they are the sponsors. So with regards to health, a form of corporate censorship happened to Dr. Max Gerson, the doctor I talked about in some of my previous videos, particularly the video about raw food. Dr. Gerson was a medical doctor who used to cure health problems through proper nutrition. He first started with curing his own migraine headaches with diet and moved to skin tuberculosis, and soon started curing every disease under the sun, including terminal illnesses. Illnesses that were incurable by definition, and then soon started curing patients of the granddaddy of all illnesses, which is cancer. Now, I talk about Dr. Gerson more extensively in my raw food video, as well as my video called Why Correction of Health Issues Happen on Subpar Diets. Anyway, back in 1946, Dr. Gerson was summoned by Senator Claude Pepper of Florida to testify in front of a congressional subcommittee to approximate $100 million for a cancer research center in which Dr. Gerson would play a major part. So Dr. Gerson brought 5 terminal cancer patients, which he had healed of cancer in front of the US Senate, to testify that they were healed of cancer by Dr. Gerson. So the famous TV broadcaster Raymond Swing had heard of Dr. Gerson's testimony in front of the US Senate, and he did a broadcast on ABC television on July 3rd, 1946, proclaiming that a cure for cancer had now been found, which had been viewed by millions. Once this broadcast aired, the pharmaceutical companies that make the anti-cancer drugs found out, and Raymond Swing was promptly fired from ABC, and the broadcast was never aired on television again. This is because curing cancer was extremely bad for the cancer business, which continues to this day. So this is the best example I can give you that relates to health. Lately in the news, due to the pandemic, you've seen mainly positive news about certain pharmaceutical drug companies such as Pfizer and others. But wait until you see this clip.
Well, this is just spectacular. Who did this? I want to credit them properly because it's actually just wonderful. @_Whitney Webb, 2 B's, tweeted out this video. It's a compilation from some of your favorite news programs. Take a look.
Good Morning America is brought to you by Pfizer.
CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer.
Anderson Cooper 360.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer.
CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer. Early Start. Brought to you by Pfizer. Friday night on Aaron Burnett Out Front. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer.
This weather report brought to you by Pfizer.
Today's countdown to the royal wedding is brought to you by Pfizer.
And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer.
Meet the Press Data Download brought to you by Pfizer.
This portion of CBS This Morning sponsored by Pfizer.
On how to find the hidden sugars in the American family diet. Sponsored by Pfizer.
Must I add anything else?
Most of the news we hear about these companies is positive, but it's safe to guess that if anything negative about those companies came out, nothing negative about their products would be aired on mainstream media, given that they are basically the sponsors of basically everything. You can guess from watching that clip how large companies control what news is aired and not aired on television. In the olden days, prior to the internet, there were only a handful of large broadcasting companies, and they largely all gave the same opinion, same as today. So basically, the entire population would all be brainwashed into thinking the exact same way because there was no alternative news source to get a counter-argument. The opinions of the mainstream media is still controlled by one side of the political spectrum and also by large corporate interests. So the opinions you receive on these are still largely biased and a complete mischaracterization of the truth. But the good news is that today, in the age of the internet, anyone with a computer or smartphone can go on YouTube, Rumble, or other video platform, or look for other alternative news sources, and some of these have long-form interviews and long-form dissections of current media events, where the ideas are fleshed out in detail, including all abstractions and nuances, and in some cases where knowledge of economics or history is needed to understand in detail, these are given as well. Nowadays, what's happening is that the major tech companies are also engaging in censorship as well, mostly along political lines, but now there are alternatives to using the products of these major platforms. Alternatives to YouTube include other video streaming services such as Rumble, and alternatives to web browsers such as Google include ones such as DuckDuckGo. Both of these are relatively free of censorship, so that a more wide variety of opinions on any given subject is available. Obviously, most people don't have the time to go into this much detail, but if you're getting your news from any of the mainstream media outlets such as CNN or MSNBC, and you're taking it all at face value as much as the general public does, you are being misled. The information given by these outlets regarding health, politics, economics, world events, foreign affairs, or most other topics is basically useless, possibly worse than useless. And a dissenting counter-argument to these opinions can be found by anyone with a smartphone. This doesn't mean that you should get into conspiracy stories, but at least you should scan these counter-arguments for logic and reason. You have to use logic and deductive reasoning to see if these counter-arguments make sense logically or not. To not understand that the mainstream media is full of propaganda and brainwashing is to be completely naive on an incredibly large scale. If you are taking anything you see or read in mainstream media at face value, you are being brainwashed without realizing it. But you should also be skeptical of anything you see or read on alternative websites and platforms, as well, as there is a lot of conspiracy stories and misinformation to go around equally. All opinions should be scanned to see if they make sense logically and rationally. So now you're probably thinking, what does all this have to do with my health? Well, you can see how corporate censorship affected Dr. Gerson, and as someone who has healed himself of all kinds of health problems through proper diet and nutrition, I can tell you that nutrition does cure health problems, and this is because bad nutrition is the cause of these problems in the first place. And in the modern age, we are constantly bombarded with information about which unnatural substances cause cancer and which fruits and vegetables have cancer-fighting compounds. So it's entirely possible that if you take away all the cancer-causing substances and eat a diet full of cancer-fighting substances, cancer would go away. So it's completely plausible that Dr. Gerson healed as many people from cancer as he claimed. You've also seen in my previous videos all the scientific experiments done on rats and other animals that confirm that proper nutrition facilitates health, and bad nutrition causes bad health. So the idea that you can heal someone of cancer through proper nutrition is logically and scientifically sound. Even today, if you go on Wikipedia and other websites, Dr. Gerson is treated as some kind of crank, as if curing people of health issues through diet is some kind of miracle or supernatural event, in the same category as aliens, the Illuminati, or faith healing, when it's really just a normal working of the human body, as you can clearly see when you cut your finger or catch a cold, and it slowly heals by itself without any medical intervention. In any case, now that I've explained how regulatory capture works, you can probably guess why many food additives and chemicals that are in the vast majority of our packaged foods never get banned. And why the regulatory agencies claim that they are perfectly safe when anyone with a computer and an internet connection can easily find study after study showing how harmful many of these chemicals actually are. Take monosodium glutamate, for instance. Everybody knows that monosodium glutamate is bad for you. In fact, it has been known since the late 1950s. Yet the regulatory agencies will keep saying and have been saying all along that monosodium glutamate is perfectly safe for human consumption, and they never ban it. This is also true of sodium benzoate, aspartame, and thousands of other chemicals that are in our packaged foods. The regulatory agencies keep saying that these things are perfectly safe, even though independent studies show that this is not the case. There are in fact toxic substances, not just in food, but in everything from shampoo to deodorant to hair dye, that when applied to your skin can have damaging effects on your health. So what is the solution if not regulation? Well, the solution is simply to self-regulate, meaning that you yourself don't need to wait for the government to ban something before you stop eating it or using it on your body. If you read the back of the box or package, you will see that the list of ingredients is clearly listed right on the back. And this food labeling regulation is more than enough to let you know what is in the product. But some ingredients like natural flavors or spices allow for some unnatural products to be included in these descriptions, so I suggest doing further research on this yourself. Now, if you have watched my previous videos, you will know that I am someone who supports a diet mainly of raw food, meaning fresh, uncooked fruits and vegetables. So I generally would advise you to do most of your food shopping in the produce section and to buy as much of it organic as possible. But if you are going to buy packaged foods, then generally speaking, if there is anything more than the product itself in the package, you should leave it on the shelf. So if you see the product in the ingredients list and then a list of chemicals beside the product, you shouldn't buy it. You should just leave it on the shelf. However, if you really insist, you can just search each chemical individually on the internet and see what the studies that have been done on each particular chemical say. You should make sure that these are independent studies though, and not studies that are funded by the food manufacturing company itself. Food manufacturing companies fund their own studies, and the scientists that do these studies are expected to do these studies thousands of times in a million different ways until they get the results that these large food companies are looking to get. So you have to make sure that these are independent studies, not studies funded by large food companies. In general, though, most of the chemicals in our food are all petrochemicals, meaning they are petroleum-based, and any kind of petroleum-based chemical is unsafe for human consumption. So this is why I just avoid all the foods with the long list of chemicals altogether. Generally speaking, if the list of ingredients is longer than just a few items, you should just leave it on the shelf. You have to remember that when a company or business or any individual puts up a product for sale, that person is just putting it out there that he is selling this product. You have no obligation to buy it. Any product that is not to your liking, for any reason, you are not obligated to purchase. So for health-conscious people such as me and you, we can simply choose not to purchase these products. You have to remember that a lot of people are simply not health conscious, and health is simply not at the top of their list, regardless of how much you or I think it should be. So for example, organically grown food is very popular now due to the growing consciousness about health, but there are many people who are not health conscious and don't feel the necessity to pay extra for organic food. The effect of regulations is that they have the tendency to take away options. If the government made a law that said that all food had to now be organically grown, these people who have no interest in preserving their health would be forced to pay extra for organically grown food, but would still be drinking soda, eating potato chips, and eating chocolate bars, candy, and fast food. So in that case, what difference does it make if they are forced to pay extra to eat organic food when all the other stuff they are eating is garbage anyway? The only effect that the regulation has is to take away the option of buying conventionally grown produce for people who are not willing to pay more for produce to not have pesticides sprayed on them. You have to remember that no one is forcing anyone to buy conventionally grown produce that has all kinds of pesticides applied to it. The seller is putting it up for sale, and you have the option to buy or not to buy. The transaction is completely consensual, and it is up to you whether or not you want to buy it or not. The reality is that organically grown produce does cost more to produce, and people who are health conscious buy it because they're willing to pay more to purchase it. If a person who is not health conscious would have to pay more to buy food now, if a rule like this were introduced, all the while eating other junk food, it would seem pointless to force this person to pay more for food. The point that I'm trying to make is that regulations tend to have the effect of limiting options. That's all. Even without the regulation being in place, organically grown food is freely available in the marketplace. You just have to choose whether or not to buy it. There's actually an economic freedom index which is put up by various institutes. Here in Vancouver, where I'm located, we have one called the Fraser Institute, and it shows that the countries that have the most regulations are actually the poorest countries, and the countries that are the least regulated are actually the richest. So as you can see from the chart, as the level of regulation goes down, the countries become richer and richer. And as the level of regulation goes up, the countries get poorer and poorer, until you get to the most regulated and poorest countries here at the bottom, which are generally Cuba, Venezuela, and North Korea, the poorest and most regulated economies on Earth. In fact, millions of people all over the world are kept in poverty by the fact that the governments of the countries they live in have all kinds of well-intentioned regulations that produce all kinds of unintended consequences that a lot of times are worse than the problems they are trying to fix in the first place, whether these problems are real or imagined. So in reality, an excess of regulations can keep whole countries poor and in dire grinding poverty. In addition, countries that are heavily regulated also have the highest levels of corruption. This is because in order to get any business done, business people have to bribe politicians to get around the bureaucracy that a heavily regulated economic environment tends to bring. This can be seen most vividly on the continents of Africa and South America, which are both littered by some of the most heavily regulated and poorest countries on Earth. But the outliers on both of these continents, which are Botswana and Chile, are two of the least regulated countries on these continents and have standards of living that are closer to what you would find in most European countries or in North America. This decrease in the standard of living that regulations tend to cause is due to the fact that this type of environment makes it difficult and cumbersome for businesses to operate. Now, the great thing about the free market is that as long as someone is willing to pay for something, some entrepreneur somewhere will see this opportunity and jump to capitalize on it. So because a growing number of people have been getting health conscious over the last couple of decades or so, organically grown food and natural foods have become more and more popular, and there are more and more entrepreneurs out there producing them. More and more farmers are getting into organic farming due to the growing demand, and the willingness of the public to pay more for produce that isn't covered in harmful pesticides has increased substantially. As well, more so now than ever, there are more and more items available in the natural food aisles of most grocery stores. I remember when I first started trying to eat organically grown food, there was very little available in conventional grocery stores, and you had to go to special organic stores to purchase organic produce. Now every grocery store has an organic section in their produce department and a natural food aisle for their packaged foods, where they take foods that would normally be made with unhealthy ingredients like white sugar and white flour and petrochemicals, and replace them with whole wheat flour, honey, or maple syrup, and leave the chemicals out. This is the magic of the free market. As long as people want something badly enough that they're willing to pay for it, some entrepreneur somewhere will see this and make it for you. So rather than worry about what regulatory agencies will or won't ban, you should become your own regulator. You need to self-regulate. You need to regulate what you will or won't put into onto your body, and only purchase products that won't poison you and make you sick or more susceptible to getting sick. Remember, just because someone is selling something doesn't mean that you need to be buying. That person or business is simply just putting it out there that that item is for sale. You are not obligated to buy. The reality is that while you can vote for politicians to regulate, you are actually voting every day or every time you make a purchase. When you purchase organically grown food or natural foods not made with harmful processed foods or with petrochemicals, you're actually voting in favor of those companies and against the companies that are making the food the conventional way. Every time you buy anything, you are supporting that business and voting in favor of that business with your dollar, and in effect voting against another businessman who is selling a competing product. So by simply purchasing foods that are in line with your health goals, you are showing that there is demand, and you are giving money to businesses that will in turn use that money to invest further into their business and keep them producing organic, healthy food. So the best thing you can do about regulatory capture is to simply ignore it and self-regulate yourself. You need to be in the driver's seat of your own health and not worry about what government regulatory agencies are doing. You need to take charge of your own health and health outcomes and take the attitude of being responsible for your own health instead of waiting for government regulatory agencies to ban this or that food additive. Unfortunately, those agencies have been co-opted by the industries they are regulating, and the sooner you understand this, the sooner you will stop looking to them to ban something before you decide to stop eating it. You can wait decades or even centuries or even indefinitely before something gets banned, so why wait? Just do a little research, and as soon as you find out what independent studies show, you can simply take that item out of your diet. In general, though, most chemicals that are added to food will be bad for you. So for me, to be on the safe side, I do most of my food shopping in the produce aisle, mostly in the organic section, and when I do buy packaged food, I buy that in the healthy aisle, the natural food aisle of the grocery store, and even then I read the ingredients list before purchasing. There are lots of independent studies that have been done that anyone with a computer can just look up. But in general, the general rule is that the more natural the food is, the safer it will be to eat, meaning that the less additives and the less processed and even the less heated the food is, the safer it is to eat. The less you do to your food from the time it comes out of the ground until the time that it gets put into your mouth, the healthier it generally will be for you. So you really have to realize that ultimately each individual person is responsible for themselves and their own well-being, and has to do what's in their own self-interest regardless of what the rest of the world is doing. If the rest of the world is going one way, that doesn't mean you should too. And if it's in your own best interest to go in the opposite direction, you may have to do just that. Ultimately, it's your health, and you are the one who should regulate it, not anyone else. Okay, that's all I have for you today. Once again, my name is Rob, and I specialize in health and nutrition videos. If you like this video, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel. Please put any comments you may have in the comment section and describe any situations you had with regulatory capture or censorship. Okay, bye for now. Thanks for watching.
So here's Black in the Empire says the agencies funded by Big Pharma and the politicians funded by Big Pharma are on the news networks funded by Big Pharma, giving you the information for why you should trust Big Pharma. I wouldn't believe anything I heard from CNN, NBC, CNBC, MSNBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post. I would scrutinize everything you're being told from them, especially when they're quoting government sources. As we all know, we have regulatory capture. We know that the FDA gets at least 46% of their budget from the people they're supposed to be regulating. I've heard stats of 70%. We know there's a revolving door with the FDA and Big Pharma. I know that the guy who was the head of the FDA for 2 years now sits on the board of Pfizer.
By pursuing his own interest, that is to say, his meaning the person engaged in free enterprise, the person who functions within the capitalist free enterprise system, Adam Smith says, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectively than when he really intends to promote it. Smith says, I have never known much good done by those who affected to trade for the public good, meaning that's a hard thing to...
But take the last part of that. I've never known
see that
much,
again, Ronnie.
I've never known much good done. No, I don't have to see it. I've never known much good done by those who affected to trade for... Affected. Note he doesn't say did trade. Affected to trade for the public good. Now, that word affected is a very important point, because you must realize that people don't always express their real interests or their real values. They say what they think will be attractive to the public at large. Let me give you a very simple example right now. General Motors and the trucking industry, when they come down to Washington and say we ought to continue regulation, do they say we ought to continue regulation in order to promote our interests? What do they say? They say the public will be hurt. They are affecting the trade for the public good. But do you think they're kidding themselves?
They're saying we don't want the wonderful individual people in middle America to be hurt. And you're saying that's not what they're...
They know they're not stupid.
They're not Santa Claus.
They're not Santa Claus. They are people who are promoting their own interest, and they're affecting the trade for the public good because that's the way to get things done. Nobody ever goes up to Congress and says, look, vote me a big bonanza of $100,000 because I'm a good man and I deserve $100,000 out of the public purse. No. He says you should subsidize X, Y, and Z because the poor middle-class Americans or the poor people in the slums will be benefit from it, by it. So you have two classes of people, the so-called do-gooders. You have the honest, sincere people, and they invariably end up being the front men for private interests they would never knowingly support.
For decades, we've all had countless opportunities to see and experience eye-opening realizations about the lies we've been told by people we're supposed to be able to trust. Each of us could have thought seriously about these cases and learned the value of questioning the narratives pushed by government, media, and by organizations with an interest in convincing us to think a certain way. If you've ever personally pushed through the pervasive fog of media manipulation and authoritative lies that routinely misinform our society, if you've ever experienced an epiphany from learning a verifiable truth that contradicts the narratives you had been told to believe, you have probably felt this sense of awakening for yourself. Once you start seriously digging into the countless major stories that have been misreported or outright fabricated by the press, the innumerable lies told by politicians that are endlessly parroted and replayed around the world without question, and the coordinated suppression of information on social media that prevents ordinary people from effectively debating or challenging claims made by people in positions of power, you might feel like you've been unplugged from a fantasy world for the first time. But the examples of unreliable, malicious, and hopelessly biased media are literally too numerous to list. A year ago, if you'd suggested that a certain illness escaped from a lab instead of a wet market, your post would have been taken down, and you'd have been scolded for sharing misinformation. Your account might have even gotten suspended. Although even at the time, those claims were all subject to debate. Meanwhile, the man whose department funded the lab in question has lied repeatedly under oath and intentionally misinformed people several times in the middle of a crisis. If you share his false statements on social media, no one cares. We've somehow accepted a world where Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube get to decide what is or is not true, and they will punish you for falling on the wrong side of that line. If you repeatedly post content they don't like, your account may be quietly silenced, temporarily blocked, or shut down for good. But they're terrible arbitrators of fact, and although plenty of people work hard to deny the obvious, their restrictions are clearly skewed by their ideological preferences. But we've seen dozens of cases where claims that got flagged as misinformation later turned out to be true, or at least debatable. And yet remember, accounts that violate rules against misinformation get demoted in the algorithm or worse. At the same time, what somehow doesn't get fact-check warnings are all the claims made by CNN, NBC, Washington Post, New York Times, and other news networks about all sorts of things they're willfully wrong about, like blatant denial of inflation and other serious economic problems, and various wild exaggerations about other issues. The list of botched stories over the last few years alone is endless, and there's a pretty clear pattern to what they're getting wrong. In general, it seems that whenever a false claim is made by a so-called authoritative source, it gets a pass. Narratives that support the interests and values of politicians and the people who run major news organizations, television and movie studios, and the social networks themselves are promoted and widely distributed. And yet, demonstrably true claims made by people challenging those narratives get squashed. And since the vast majority of the industry leans a certain direction, then we shouldn't be shocked when news stories are mostly told from that perspective. The most insidious problem is that the power to control what people see and hear is heavily concentrated in the hands of just a few networks and social media companies that mostly all behave the same way. They decide what shows up on your TV, your radio, and in your newsfeed, and they can make it extremely difficult for casual viewers to see information they don't want them to see. That's a lot of power, and it doesn't get used for good. Which means that they're complicit in spreading misinformation for the purpose of controlling behavior, in a context where they have complete control over what people are allowed to see. That's genuine propaganda. Journalists even give themselves awards for badly written stories that are easily proven to be false. It often makes me wonder just how many people form strong opinions about important subjects that they'll never personally question, based entirely on these kinds of lies and false reports. And how many hold on to their delusions long after the supporting facts have been retracted and debunked. At this point, relying on most journalists to provide accurate information assumes a level of competence and integrity that I honestly just don't think is wise. You can unplug yourself. All you have to do is adopt a much more skeptical attitude toward the stories that get broadcast and shared across your networks, especially those that confirm your biases, play off of your worst fears and anxieties, or tell you exactly what you want to hear. Break free from the matrix of bad information and experience more of the real world as it actually is.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. The Matrix. Do you want to know what it is? Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Welcome to the real world.
Why, oh why, didn't I take the blue pill?